OK. Il y a eu une petite pause dans les gens qui se joignent à nous. Donc, bienvenue tout le monde. Bonsoir. On va passer peut-être quelques moments agréables. Et donc, je vous rappelle que si vous voulez un certificat de participation, il suffit de prendre un screenshot et de l'envoyer à staff@frenchteachers.org et on vous enverra un certificat de participation. Et maintenant, on va passer à l'essentiel. Donc, je passe l'écran et la parole à Nicole Tartaglia, who's going to start us off this evening about teaching writing.
Merci, Madame Jane. Merci tout le monde d'être ici ce soir avec moi. J'espère que vous avez passé une très bonne journée, une très bonne semaine et que tout va bien chez vous à cause de cette crise que nous avons à ce moment. Mais j'espère que ce soir, nous serons tous ensemble pour une petite pause et un peu la communauté française et la vie francophone et la vie des French teachers. C'est ça ce que j'aime beaucoup. Alors, moi, je suis la seule prof de français à Manchester Regional High School en Passaic County, New Jersey. Oui, moi, je suis la seule. J'enseigne niveau numéro 1 jusqu'à 5 et AP aussi. J'ai environ 115 étudiants chaque année, de 8th grade jusqu'à terminale. Et j'adore faire ça. OK, ce soir, moi, je vais parler beaucoup, malheureusement, je vais parler beaucoup de, tous les personnes qui sont les seules. Bon courage, Katia. Je vais parler en anglais pour vous expliquer ce que j'avais ici. Je vais partager mon écran avec vous. Et alors, we're going to talk a little bit about how I allow students to find their inner lion and lioness, learning something that I don't know about your specific interactions, but mine when I say, okay, we're going to learn all about pronouns, the children fairly melt into their seats, like, yay, you know, and then there's just a physical allergic reaction from a lot of them. Moi, je suis à New Jersey maintenant. Et alors, j'avais mis ça dans le chat. Il faut faire dire ça pour Madame Jane. So let's begin. I'm going to share my screen with you. I have a Google Slides that, of course, I will pass on to any of you and some fun things that I'll share. Tonight, I'm going to demonstrate how I'm making it work at all levels for writing. And actually, my students will be taking the New Jersey Seal of Biliteracy exam on the 17th. For French, we also test in Arabic and Spanish in my school, which is cool. And my students this year taking it who I know will pass will be the first in school history to get them in French. So that's pretty exciting. We have native speakers and we have students that are, I like to call them homegrown. So this is just a little something that I put together so that I could share the best of what I have with all the best of you. And I've called this Map It Up. And that's what I teach my students. And I say that they're going to be grammar nerds. And I use this word nerd and I say it's a hallowed piece of language for me. It just means that you have got ultimate swag. Are you folks able to see my presentation? Can someone just give me verbal confirmation?
Yes, we see it.
Awesome sauce. That's perfect. So I've titled this a less stress guide. It's not stressless, but it is less stress to teaching the pronom d'objet to niveau 2, niveau 3, whenever it is that you particularly get to it in your curriculum. I always like to start with a little quote, and this is so a real part of my life. La simplicité est la clé de l'élégance. C'est la clé de tout, enfin. It's the key to all. So we keep it simple in my classroom. Common sense rules the day. And, you know, I have a good friend who said something like this to me, you know, how do you eat a whale? He told me one bite at a time, and it's not the whole sea. Ce n'est pas la mer à boire. So it's really not. We get back to basics. Many students, by the time we get them and we're teaching this, you know, I'm thinking about my colleagues will speak later tonight about writing and thinking critically and designing interactive grammar and writing classes. Well, if our students don't arrive with a command of parts of speech and how they are interlocutors together, then it's going to be difficult. So for me, it's a lot of common sense. And this is an approach I've found that reaches out to all learning modalities, which has been good because you have your tactiles, you have your listeners, you have your watchers, and this gets to each of them. So we get back to basics and we start talking about what parts of speech actually are. And it's been a long time typically since your students have talked about what a subject is, what a direct object is, what an adjective is, what a noun is. And it sounds silly, but it's incredible. Every year I ask the same question and I already know I'm going to get an incorrect but approximate answer. So the first thing we do is we start tying into their prior knowledge and we get them pumped up about the stuff that they know. And we want to kind of puff them up a little so that they're mentally present for the challenge and they're ready, because we know a lot of it is just about self-confidence. It's tough enough to be a middle schooler or a high schooler. We want to be the class they come to every day where they hear, yes, you can. So we get rid of that I can't mindset and we begin with a review and we laugh a little bit. I love to infuse humor into my classroom. I try not to take myself too seriously. So we define our terms. And every year I ask my students, okay, so what is a subject? And I get the same answer every year. Oh, it's what the sentence is all about. And I guarantee if you ask your students, they'll tell you that too. And I say, no, that's the topic. And we talk about the subject and the verb and the direct object. And I use baseball to tie them together. Now, this for me is always important. As a woman who teaches French, I always want to be mindful of engaging my male students as much as I'm engaging my female students. You know, I really want equity in my classrooms. I'm very lucky. I'm married to a sports reporter, so but I really love sports. So it's fun to reach for these kinds of things. And I talk about the subject, the verb, and the direct object like you talk about the pitcher, the ball, and the catcher behind the plate. The pitcher is that subject, the person doing the action. The ball, it's traveling at 95 miles an hour. That's our verb. And that catcher, if you've ever heard a ball hit a mitt, bang, that is our direct object because it's receiving the action. And I'm all over the place. I'm standing, I'm throwing, I'm kneeling, I'm catching, and they need to see that you're into it. So we tap into that prior knowledge. They're going to know what a verb is. They're going to know what an adjective is. And we build simple definitions and create relatable mnemonic devices and anecdotes like our pitcher, ball catcher, and more. So I model this in steps. Obviously, we go in a progressive order. We start with direct objects and we talk about how to identify it. And then we talk about how to replace it with a pronoun. One of my things I enjoy doing is sort of phase in participation where I'll model it once or twice and then I start asking for pieces of it. So I'll put a sentence up on the board and we'll see this in a little bit. And I tell them, okay, this is the subject, this is the verb, this is this part. And it starts to become almost a call answer activity where I just am standing at a board or in a virtual scenario, which we'll see later, I have a Jamboard up or a Google Doc up, and I'm asking them. And my favorite tagline during virtual learning has been my rhyme time, which is unmute and contribute, I tell them. And I encourage making mistakes because they generate the best teachable moments. So I've incorporated video into this that shows you a little bit about how I teach this. And these are just Screencastify videos that I made of myself that I've embedded right into my slides that are using a document that I created years ago. And it's something I took with me on an interview to one of the top 10 public schools in New Jersey. And the students were, I ended up teaching there for a few years afterwards, and the student said, Madame, this thing you left us was the best thing anyone ever made us. It was so easy to understand how to do it. And so this is a little peek into direct objects. I may not play the whole thing, it's a couple of minutes long, but again, any portion of this that you want, I'm happy to have sent to you or share. So let's take a little look.
Salut, bienvenue, et on va faire un petit review des pronoms d'objet, and it's going to cover all the pronouns. So we've been through everything together. And this little video is going to help you know more about this at a glance. So let's start with a little bit, un petit peu de revue, s'il vous plaît. So we're going to begin at the beginning, au début. Pardon. And we're going to start with terms. So let's start by defining our terms. We have our direct object, pronom d'objet direct en français. And we use the imagery of a picture or thing that's doing the action. All right. And our verb is the action being done. That's easy. And we have our direct object. And this is the person or thing receiving, the action. Very simple. So the pitcher has the ball, the catcher, bang, receives that ball. 95-mile-an-hour fastball right in that catcher's glove. So let's take a look at a simple review sentence. Let's map it up and let's run through all of our systems check questions here. So I'll pick a simple color and we'll go from there. We have, and we would do this out loud together. I'd have the students say this as I did it. So tu is my subject. Prend is my conjugated verb. And if they don't specify it's a conjugated verb, I make every type of exasperated noise in the world. What kind? And they'll yell back at me, conjugated verb. And that comes in really handy for placement of our pronouns when we have a two verb, verb plus infinitive situation. Okay, the verb prendre means to take. So what's being taken? The sandwich. Good. So that makes our sandwich what? The direct object. And that is how we map up a simple direct object sentence.
So for me, I will create little things for them that are our sort of abbreviations for each part of speech, but I do differentiate for each student and say, listen, if you want to call it something else, that's fine. You can make your own code. Most adopt the things that I call them, but I always want to give my students the freedom to label them what they need to trigger their memory most effectively. And that's especially important for my English language learners. So we talked or hinted a little bit in my video about the golden rule. The golden rule of pronouns in my world is one in front, two between. And I said, we always want to find patterns because patterns make our life easy. Little simple ideas. And what this is once we've onboarded more of our pronouns, we get through the direct, we get through indirect, we get through the pronoun I. And then we want to decide how we're going to rewrite our sentence. And if we have one verb, those pronouns are going in front of it. If we have a conjugated and an infinitive, it's going between. So that little phrase, one in front, two between, small, chewable, easy to remember phraseology is going to help them. And I tell the students that the reason we get so specific about knowing our parts of speech is because of another sort of unspoken golden rule I have. It's the rule of common sense, where I tell them, here's the deal with parts of speech. If you know what it is and you know what it does, then you're going to know how to use it. And it's as simple as that. I liken it to playing Sudoku. If you know which numbers you've got, you know which numbers you have yet to play. And we're going to make a simple relational statement about it in that way. So this is sort of me talking about the golden rule and checking in there. And again, I did a lot of this ahead of time to make sure that I stayed on time in this presentation. So I'll share a bit of this. This one's a little bit longer, but again, I can always skip ahead.
I'll grab my pen here just quickly. And once they've identified le pronom, I teach them something pretty simple. This is their pronom d'objet direct, or their objet direct, pardon. And it's this. Obviously, there's an order of pronouns, but I have a rule. I make sure that they know this little rule first, and I call it the golden rule of pronouns. I say all pronouns follow the same rules of placement. They're simple, they're finite, and it's all to do with counting your verbs. And the little rule is one in front, two between. I'll show you what I mean. And it makes it so simple because a lot of times I'll ask leading questions. How many verbs do you have? So we take this sentence here, tu prends le sandwich, which we've already mapped. And I say, okay, so when you have a direct object, if they give you le, la, or L apostrophe, you're going to give it right back. And I have them learn to yell that at me as the direct object. So we cross out the noun because it's been replaced. And I say, okay, well, how many verbs are in this sentence? And they've identified this conjugated prend, and it's one verb. And I say, so what's the rule? And they will tell me one in front. And we draw this, pretty erratic arrow. And then usually I ask them to retype the sentence, tu le prends. Very simple. So that allows me to build and go forward. As I do, I'm able then to put in double verb sentences. You know, so if I do something simple like what I said before, let me move that down. Je vais prendre pardon me, la pizza, for example. Same thing. I would have them map it up. And I am relentless in my demand. They have to know every part, subject. They have to know that they and prendre are both verbs. And, you know, typically by niveau 2, niveau 3, that's pretty de rigueur. But I am relentless with this is conjugated and this is an infinitive verb. And we've created our own coding system. S for subject, CV for conjugated verb, INF. Some kids like IV. I even tell them use something you know that's going to help you. Okay, so what am I going to have? I'm going to have the pizza. That's my direct object. It's receiving the action of what's going to be had. Okay, great. So let's talk about what I'm going to replace it with. They gave me law, folks. So what do? And they're yelling at me. I give it right back. It sounds like a fight's going to happen, but it's actually just some good grammar. And I actually tell them to write it above. Okay, how many verbs do I have? And if they've mapped their sentence correctly, it's pretty simple. There are 2 verbs. Where do I put it? 2 between. Okay, show me with the arrow. I always make sure that they're going ahead and doing this. So if you were doing something where you were using GoGuardian or you were using a screen where I know that they're just rolling a program out now through Pear Deck where you can see them, or if you use a draw slide on Nearpod, you could totally do this and check to see that they're both labeling their sentences and, you know, rewriting them and putting things in the same place. And then
okay, I'm going to stop that there just so we don't do too much of it. I don't want to bore you to tears. So that really is this foundation, really knowing their parts of speech. And once we get through our direct and our indirect objects, it becomes easy.
And I'll grab my pen here just quickly. And once they've identified le pronom, you know,
okay. And once they've identified the direct and the indirect, it gets easier to add things on. Quick tip, with the indirect object, I start to talk about prepositional phrases. And so we add that to our acumen of well-known grammar vernacular. But I also build in some important, you know, sort of buzz phrases or buzzwords. First of all, obviously a definition. It's the person or thing that's, and I think I left it off there, receiving the benefit. And I always use my parents. We always start with a little sentence that says, John buys flowers. And we talk about John and that he's buying. And what's he buying? The flowers. And then I say, okay, well, let's change our little early sentence. John buys flowers for Jan. And I said, who's Jan? And that's who's getting the flowers. So she's the one that's benefiting. And what it's telling us is really what's here. What we're looking for is verbs of giving, receiving, and communication. And I have them write those down. Donner, parler, téléphoner, envoyer, dire. And if you're seeing a verb of giving, receiving, or communicating, you can pretty much be sure you're going to have that indirect beneficiary. The other thing we're looking for is these phrases, these prepositional phrases that typically start with ah or some form of ah. So this is a great time to stop and quickly review how we do contractions with ah. And what they mean. And I typically tell them ah plus a person because it's typically a human being. Could be a dog, I give the bone to the puppy, but it's typically a human being. So we look for that, whether it's a proper name or it's ton voisin, whatever that might be. And then I make my relatable and easy to remember mnemonic device. I make the comparative analysis, direct objects and indirect objects. I call my direct objects, they are my goldfish. And I said, what happens if you win a goldfish at the little fair around the corner from your house, and then you promptly put it in a salt water tank? That goldfish is not going to be with you for very long. I said, I want you to think about prep phrases like saltwater tanks. You're never going to find a direct object in a prep phrase. It stays with them. But indirect objects, those are sharks. You're going to find sharks always in prepositional phrases. And then I give them the simple reference for an indirect object that it always answers the question to or for whom. I'm buying the car for my son. I'm sending the email to my boss, etc., etc. So these are just things that structurally and easy reference and things that you can say out loud to students that allow them to remember, sort of leading questions. These have helped. When we get to the pronoun e, we know these are prep phrases of location. And for me, again, it's all about quick buzzwords, and we talk about prepositions of location. And that's the list I typically give them at the outset. Of course, there are many more. We try to get them to remember that they have to think outside the box. It's not just something you can plot on a map. If the coffee cup is on the table, you can replace that phrase. And that's how I work through that. And again, it's going to be also a prepositional phrase that starts typically, it can happen with ah, but it won't have a person. It'll be ah plus a location. And then we have our on, and our buzzwords show up again. Of course, it's a great time to review your contractions with your partitive articles, but also numbers and expressions of quantity. And the challenge there is, of course, to leave behind the expression of quantity, taking the noun with you. And these are just quick visuals that I give them. And we do examples. I'll show you that in a piece. So when we put them all together, I love that little kid's face. I don't let them anywhere near this ending piece until I know they're stable. And then that's when they start to sort of put everything together. So this is sort of the last portion of the video that sort of shows you something that's been super helpful to me in distance learning, which for me has been homework walkthroughs. Last year when we ended in March, I have not seen my students since March, not physically. We didn't have any synchronous learning time. I didn't even see them through screens because we didn't have enough accountable software just yet, but we're good now. So this is what I did. You know, this was a lot of what helped me get to a point, and I won't make it too big, but it was just this. Let's see if I can move it forward quickly. See if that'll let me go forward. But it was just a way for me to choose different questions. And again, you can view this on your own time. I know I'm getting short on time and I want to leave time for questions. I went through and I made sure that I chose enough of a variable type of question so that students could see examples of all the different types of challenges that they might have. And then they could, you know, email me back. And
so by the time we get to this step, it's really been.
Hush, I just said that. That Nicole, she never stops talking. Okay, so this is sort of the end of my presentation here, and I have a pronoun guide that I'm happy to share with you. Let me pause my share. Can I move this down here? Actually, and I can send that to you. Oops, coming back, and it's here. If you click on it, it should come up. Everybody has access to it. It's just a Google Doc. And it literally just takes you through. It asks all those questions. It gives all those hints. It provides really good examples of what you might use. It talks about the golden rule, discussion about definitions, review of contractions. And then if I get into, this is one of my favorites if you're using Google Suite, this is Jamboard. And this is you all could, write on this. If I dropped this link in the chat, you would be able to come in here and we could talk about it. And I could have different students come in and leave a sticky note to ask a question. What is number 1? And you can, make them in all types of colors. And they're here and they can come in and use these and refer back to these at any time. Am I going here? Can I go to this? Yeah, looks like it. One of my favorite things to do at the beginning of an activity is a Monday someday activity. So if we were in a brand new class and I said, okay, what do you know about parts of speech? What do you know about them today? And what would you like to know about them someday? And again, we have students who will grab sticky notes and say, well, I know what an adjective is and I know what a verb is. But someday they'll put a different sticky note up and say, someday I want to be able to map an entire sentence confidently. And you can get the students to give you feedback. And it's all without their names on it. So they don't have to feel shy about talking about what they are or aren't confident in yet. And then I do something like create a giant sentence like this. And I say, okay, treat it like the smart board in our classroom. Let's do it, everybody. Map it up. And students can just come in and in real time we can map it. We have the Google Meet running and we can discuss it together. I can tell them to unmute themselves. I can check on their progress and really it just allows me to sort of interchangeably move between documents and check for formative and summative assessments. So that's me with about 2 minutes left. I hope I didn't talk your faces off. I didn't think I was going to be able to fill a half an hour if I'm completely honest with you. I'm not sorry. I know that that's kind of basic, but for me, one of the things that has given me the most peace in teaching these strategies to students is that it gives them peace as they move forward to do so confidently. So I want to thank Jane and I want to thank AATF for allowing me to share this evening. And I'll take any questions that you might have if that's okay, or Jane is saying that for the very end. You let me know what works. Merci à tous. Oh my gosh, there's 51 things in the chat.
There are some very interesting comments in the chat that you might want to respond to as we continue. We'll share,
oh my gosh.
We'll share all the information, and I'll share the chat as well as the video, so that if you want to go back and look at anything, or if there are any links or useful comments in the chat, you'll have access to them.
I love that you guys are teaching cursive. Oh my word! I live in a world of superheroes. Absolument. Yeah, I am in, this is something I love. Grew up with traditional, keeps refreshing. So traditional method, conjugating, tried a new style of teaching, evolve. Yeah, something, it really is true. Some of the old tried and true methods, they're tried and true methods for a reason, 100%. And it's not about creating shortcuts, and it's not about, anything. Do you ever do grammar discussion in French? Yes, I do. When I'm teaching this, typically the first time it's in a French 2 classroom. And they've had, 3 semesters. So as they get more familiar with the technical terminology en français, I always tell my students by about Christmas, my English, she's very bad. I cannot converse with you in this, comment dit-on, this tongue. I start to choke on I'm ridiculous, but it's a bit on purpose. So, I try to give them that base. And then I remind them that, il faut écouter le français pour bien parler le français. and they're pretty okay about it, and they get excited. You know, have you ever noticed that quand on parle en français avec nos élèves et ils disent, oh madame, je comprends bien, oh ça va bien, c'est excitant. Et alors, so I try to foster. I'm a bit raw, but that's how I was made. So merci à tous et j'espère que vous allez passer des très bonnes vacances bientôt.
Merci, Nicole.
De rien.
Merci beaucoup.
Maintenant, on va passer la parole à Sandra. Où es-tu?
Je suis là.
Voilà, voilà.
Okay.
If you want to share your screen, we can.
Oh, yes. Share screen. And then, well, do you want me to introduce myself first or?
Either way.
Okay.
You can introduce yourself while the screen is coming up.
OK. Bonjour, je m'appelle Sandra Simmons. Je suis prof à un lycée à Dallas, Texas. Et j'enseigne aussi moi-même tous les niveaux, comme Nicole. Et voilà, donc, let me start my presentation. Ce sera en anglais parce que il y a beaucoup de mots. Et en fait, quand j'ai décidé de présenter cette chose qui s'appelle Right to Think Critically, actually, let me just switch to English. First of all, I want to thank AATF for asking me to participate in this webinar, and I appreciate everyone being here. And I really enjoyed Nicole's metaphor or her analogy with the baseball, for using the baseball analogy for teaching the direct objects and indirect objects. And I guess I was looking at it more from an idea of what kind of writing to do. And I've thought a lot about thinking and critical thinking during this whole pandemic, but also for about 3 years now, I've been teaching projects that relate back to STEAM. So I was trained to think of the open question and solving real world problems. And then I brought that into the language classroom, and it's been a lot of fun. And so I was thinking of that as I was writing this presentation for today. So right to think critically. And this presentation is going to require you to think a little bit about your own practice of teaching writing. So not so much just the parts of speech or the grammar, but the prompts that you give your students to use the language in some kind of a task. And hopefully you'll be able to reflect and have some ideas on a methodology that you could use to enhance some of the activities that you may already be using in your classroom. And actually, that's what I do. Sometimes I'll take a prompt that may be in the textbook. I have a really good textbook that's well embedded in the ACTFL guidelines and things like that. And so I'll look at some of these, and then I'll just add, I'll tweak, I'll make it a little bit more difficult. And so difficulty is the part that I believe is something that will help students to not only think critically, but become more resilient and perhaps even better global citizens. So that's sort of the focus of my presentation today. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, you're coming through loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to make sure the volume was okay. So let me move on. So how does writing create opportunities to think? So when given options pertaining to form or content of a writing assignment, students will use their critical thinking skills to accomplish the task. All right, so that's kind of a general statement. So what I like to do is give them some options. So the options themselves means that we leave, that as a teacher, I leave some of the choices up to the student. I noticed that coming up from the middle school, if I get French 2 students, they want me to tell them how many sentences, or they want to know how many verbs, or you know, they ask for very specific things, and I say, no, I'm going to give you a situation, and I want you to think of how to write about this situation. So that's kind of the form. The content, I like to give some kind of an option as well as for the content. So we may be learning, for example, routines. We're learning the reflexive verbs. We're talking present, past tense, etc. We've learned about the pronouns, the pronominal situation for the reflexive verbs. And then I give them some content direction, but I don't tell them exactly all of the parameters. And this, I believe, helps the students to have to think for themselves. And of course, as long as they stay within the global idea of what I've given them, they are able to perform very, very well, because it's already a task that they can accomplish. They've already learned some of these things, and they can now accomplish a task of writing. So then the second part, providing a framework. This is another opportunity, providing a framework that includes a personal story, analysis, or interpretation will enhance the possibility of using critical thinking. So that means that if they're using a personal story, for example, telling about, I mean, this is a typical thing, tell what your family did last weekend, right? Using the passé composé, for example. Or an analysis of a painting, and just being sure that you ask a personalized question. I think that using the digital platform makes it easy for students to just look things up and then write a nice paragraph about a description, or to write a paragraph or a dialogue that they've thought of. But if you ask them something a little bit further, you push it further and make it so that they have to interpret it. They can't just say, it's, why did you choose this? Why is this color there? What are the people in the painting thinking? And so I believe that those little opportunities will push them so that they're not just thinking of the language, but they're thinking of the story that they're telling using the language. And so it allows the students to think through the language, performing tasks. All right, so that's what I would call critical thinking. Critical thinking is also making those choices as they write. So choosing which verb they're going to use, choosing what story they're going to tell. So this is sort of the whole, sort of the one, I mean, and maybe you already think this personally, but I'm just thinking as a teacher, sometimes we want them to perform something that we know the answer to. But I believe that giving them open-ended assignments, things that are a little bit outside of our control, allows that critical thinking to occur. Another thing that's really interesting is to give them, well, to reinforce this critical thinking aspect, you can add a difficulty, an obstacle, or an ethical dilemma to the prompt. For example, the parent says, sorry, you can't go out tonight. Okay, so the student has to write a dialogue pretending that there's a parent opposing them. Okay, so that's a little difficulty. They have to figure out, how would I negotiate? But still using the simple tools that they've learned in the classroom, using some of the vocabulary that they have, but trying to strategize. And so that already engages them in a different way. An obstacle, of course, for example, there was a hurricane and there's an obstacle, they can't get food or something like this. Well, this is a little bit further in my presentation, or an ethical dilemma to the prompt. So some kind of thing where I'll show you in just a minute that there was a film that my 4 AP students watched called Entre les Murs. And in that, it presents a classroom that has a number of immigrants, and one of the students' mothers gets deported. And so they had to write about that. The ethical dilemma of, well, should Wei's mother have been deported? What does that mean? How does that change the class? So adding some kind of ethical dilemma that they can then reflect on allows them to develop those critical thinking skills. And then engaging the students in real-world problem-solving scenarios and asking them to imagine solutions allows them to suddenly become actors in their communities. Even if it's only imaginary, the truth is imagining allows them to even think they could become involved in their own communities. And so for that, for example, over the Thanksgiving break, I wanted to give students in my French 2 class something to do that was off screen. I wanted them to have a little project over the week. And so they had to map their neighborhood, in about 15-minute parameters around their house, a perimeter around their house. And then they had to look at it and ask themselves, what are some things that I don't like about this? Is it walkable? Is it not walkable? Is it dangerous? Do I wish that there were some different places I could go to in a 15-minute walk? Do I need a bike lane? And so then they became aware of those things. They had to mark those areas and make some suggestions on a map. And then they had to write a paragraph to present that to their local government to say, hey, I live in this community. I would like to have it so that I could walk there. And this actually was first a comparison between the way French children go to school and how did they get to school. And so we had a discussion before they wrote this kind of solution to their own neighborhood. So anyway, these are just little things that little bridges between the tasks makes it so that the whole unit comes together in a variety of ways. So, okay, this is all kind of a little bit abstract, but let me move forward. So here's how I would say I like to take the writing from kind of a simple parameter and then kind of ramp it up. So if you take the simple interpersonal idea, for instance, a conversation between family members about an upcoming holiday, and then you ask students to consider a set of examples. A set of, possibilities such as food options, shopping, preparations. Then you throw in the difficulty, such as one family member who refuses to participate, a snowstorm that prevents shopping, or a pandemic, for example, or being in a family that just went through a hurricane. So these are things that I have actually used in my class. The one about the hurricane, I'll show you that. Actually, let me show you right now. How do I get off of my thing? Here we are. So they had a lesson on Irma, which was a hurricane that hit Saint-Martin. It was a few years ago. And this particular class had to divide into groups of 4 and decide how the homeowner was going to find funding to rebuild. There was going to be a geologist that was going to explain what was okay about the environment, what wasn't okay, and then an architect that was going to help them think of a good house. And they had to redesign a house that would be hurricane proof. And so this was kind of a project that they did, and it requires writing in a variety of ways. They have to write questions for each other. They have to write a proposal, and then they also make a model out of paper of a house that they think would be a hurricane-resistant house. So it's kind of it's just a way to make them involved in the real world around them, and also using French. And all of it happened in French. They did their interview. They did the negotiations between the different members of the group. And then they created their homes, and they made a presentation to the rest of the class about their house and what the features of the house, why it was hurricane proof, and how it would help solve that real world problem. So that's just one of the kinds of writings that are possible. Another type. Oh, here's the French debate on Ways Mom, but that's not. The French, what they did with Ways Mom, I forgot to mention, is that they created a debate, and then they debated whether it was a good thing to send her home or whether it was necessary, it was legal. They had a big debate about it. But debating is an oral activity. It's a presentational activity, and yet it becomes interpersonal as they negotiate across the room as to who has the better point. All right, so all of that, let's see, I think I skipped this one. That's okay, we'll skip that one. All right, so I would like for you guys to go to this Padlet. All right, it's, let me put this in, let me copy it and put it in the chat box for you. Hold on, where is the, if you go to this Padlet, I'm going to have you add some ideas of different prompts that you use in your writing, in teaching writing in your class. And then I'd like for us to consider each other's prompts and think of ways that we could maybe make them a little more difficult, a little more thought-provoking. So let's see, so are you guys able to get into the Padlet? Oui. I'm going to share that. I'm going to go over to the Padlet. Is anybody Padlet?
No, how do we get it?
I don't think it's set so we can write in it.
Oh, even if you do the plus sign? Oh, is it, maybe it's because I've got it in my, well, that's a bummer. I think it's because it must be in my school account and they may not allow outside. All right, how about if you simply write in
Just write in the
box?
chat. Yeah.
That's a good idea. Yeah, let's just write in the chat. Okay, une lettre au Père Noël. So how can we complexify that? Ma lettre au Père Noël. Anyone have an idea what we could do there? Like to make the letter either something where there's a problem to be solved, or perhaps write it during a pandemic. Excellent. Yeah, how is Père Noël going to bring presents during a pandemic? What else?
Well, let me write.
Oui, très bien. Créer un dépliant pour les... Oui. Ah, I like that. La famille déménage et Père Noël ne saura pas leur nouvelle adresse. Oui, j'aime bien. Your family got displaced, you're in a new location. Right. I love that. Conseil au début, chacun essaie de dresser une liste.
Let me write.
Yes? Is my video off? I'm sorry. My video went off when I was off on the other screen. Alors. Oh, I like the real correspondence. Excellent. Excellent. Bonne idée. So I don't know if you guys do this, but I often have students start with one kind of, like maybe a interview, and then they have to create a slideshow, or they do a dialogue themselves doing it. Comment faire quand on est chez soi? Ah, chez papa, oui, exactement. Ça, c'est très bien, Marie-Fenne. Ah, oui, ça, c'est super. Une bonne idée de les vraies lettres de la poste. Students doesn't really with their children around it. Exactement. Oui, ça, c'est très bien. Yes, propose that they help kids in a different region. A place that was just struck by a hurricane or an earthquake, or a place where they know that there's maybe the the refugees or something like that. Avoir des profils de familles différents. Oui, très bien. Excellent. Et puis, j'utilise la chanson de Patrick Bruel et demande de penser à des thèmes autour. Oui, très bien. Très bien. Le besoin et l'envie. Oui. Oui, ça c'est très bien. Excellent. All right, let's try another theme, another prompt. These are great ideas. Une carte postale de mon week-end à Paris. D'accord. And what happens? Qu'est-ce qui se passe pendant le week-end? Il y avait des obstacles. J'ai perdu mon billet de train. Le passeport est perdu, exactement. Quoi d'autre? Quel malheur vous est arrivé? Oui. Il y a aussi une partie d'un chapitre dans mon textbook, se plaindre. Comment se plaindre? On prend le train dans la direction opposée, oui. Je rencontre quelqu'un et je tombe amoureux, oui. Très bien. Et alors? Ou peut-être vous allez déménager pour aller vivre à Paris. Il faut chercher une maison, un appartement. Mis à part les jolis bâtiments, qu'avez-vous vu d'autres? Oui, très bien. Il y a eu une grève de transport, oui. Ou une manif. You go hiking, end up in a... Oh, wow, I love that. Real story, huh? Quel tracas administratif allez-vous devoir surmonter? Oui, une journée dans la forêt, racontez. Très bien. Okay, so here's another one. For my students, they were going hiking in a Francophone country. They had to choose the location, research the weather, make the list of what they were preparing, and then they had to design their own tent because they wanted to make their own tent. So they had to design a tent. So they did that and then made the project in 3D, and then they presented it as if they were trying to make an invention. That can go along with une journée dans la forêt or the hiking. Alors, autre chose, une autre situation, un autre... So what about something environmental or something tying it in with another subject matter or something like, vous avez fait les projets en quelle année? Troisième ou AP? Moi? Moi, j'ai fait, ça c'était français 2 pré-AP pour inventer une tente.
D'accord, merci.
De rien, je vous en prie. Ça c'était deuxième.
Parler aussi de la protection de l'environnement. C'est un
Oui.
sujet. Oui, je n'arrive pas
ça,
à taper, je ne sais pas où se trouve le quoi là. Donc, l'environnement, oui, c'est un sujet très important aussi. Ils peuvent
oui, voilà.
laisser des idées
Excellent.
critiques là-dessus. Oui.
Et
Le recycle,
comment est-ce qu'on peut...
Recyclage des objets.
Absolument. OK. Pour ma classe de français 1, je leur demande de créer des vêtements à partir des rejets de packaging, etc., de collectionner les choses à la maison pour les amener dans la classe et il doit coudre ou créer un vêtement pour quelqu'un d'autre. Et ça, c'est toujours super. Oui. Et ça, c'était français 1.
Pour coudre.
Oui, ben, c'est-à-dire qu'il y avait, pas coudre, mais si, il y avait les garçons qui ont voulu coudre. Et ça m'a fait beaucoup rire parce que c'était les garçons qui voulaient. Donc, ils ont créé des chaussures, ils ont créé des chapeaux, ils ont créé des jupes.
Ah bon?
Oui. Ouais.
C'est intéressant.
Oui, c'est parce que dans ma salle de classe, j'ai un placard avec des petites choses, plein de ciseaux.
J'imagine. Yeah.
Ouais, ouais. Est-ce que vous créez des projets vous-même ou vous suivez? Non, je crée des trucs comme ça. Je réfléchis sur les choses pour provoquer quelque chose. Et j'aime bien aussi donner à la fois quelque chose de manuel, en même temps quelque chose d'intellectuel. Comme ça, il y a le transfert entre les deux. Ils ont un moment de pause aussi dans la journée qui peut... Quelquefois, ça prend quelques jours. C'est pas seulement 1 heure. Il faut quand même plusieurs jours pour
bien sûr.
compléter. Et s'il fait trop chaud, merci Monica, s'il fait trop chaud, le bonhomme de neige ne sera plus comme dans le poème de Jacques Prévert. Oui. Vous avez des exemples de projets de vos élèves? Oui. Le vocabulaire. Donc aussi, il y a une chose que je fais, c'est que je permets aux élèves de rechercher en ligne les manques d'informations. S'ils ont besoin d'une phrase, je leur permets de chercher parce qu'en fait, dans la vie réelle, nous, moi je ne suis pas francophone c'est pas ma langue maternelle, disons. Et donc, évidemment, je dois chercher quelquefois en ligne, je dois chercher dans un dictionnaire. Et donc, je leur montre que it's okay. It's okay. Sometimes you look for the words you need. Et donc, je les permets quelquefois de chercher, surtout pour ce genre de projet, parce que c'est pas la mémorisation, c'est l'apprentissage. Et petit à petit, ils apprennent les mots, ils apprennent les choses, même en faisant, disons, chemin faisant. Ils attrapent eux-mêmes. Et même, je trouve ça vraiment intéressant qu'ils puissent développer leur vocabulaire en dehors d'une liste que je leur donne. Donc, ça les aide quand même quelquefois. Donc, un exemple.
Et vous êtes sûr qu'ils ne font pas de Google Translation?
Bah, quelquefois, mais pas tout le temps. C'est pour ça que je leur donne absolument cet aspect qui est très personnalisé. Et puisque c'est personnalisé, ils ne peuvent pas juste copier quelque chose.
Ils sont très habiles en lettres.
Hein?
Je dis qu'ils sont très, très habiles dans Google Translation.
Oui, c'est vrai. C'est vrai. Il faut, moi, je leur répète qu'il ne faut pas le faire et j'essaie de les attraper. Si je vois quelqu'un qui le fait tout le temps, je les questionne. Pourquoi vous avez écrit ça? Etc. Explique-moi cette phrase. Alors, est-ce que j'ai si j'ai, je vais voir si je peux trouver un exemple d'un projet, peut-être. Ah, ça, c'est pas la bonne année. Ah, si, ça, c'est la bonne année. Attendez. Hop. Come on. Ça, c'est... Ça, ce ne sont pas les projets très intéressants, mais je leur fais faire plein de vidéos. Donc, ça, c'est une vidéo où ils doivent parler.
Moi aussi, je fais beaucoup de vidéos.
La famille, je crois qu'ils ont créé des slideshows. Ouais. Et ça, ils présentent la famille de leur partenaire, par exemple. Et ils expliquent les choses. I'm not sure if I can find a STEAM project right off the bat because sometimes it's hard to find. Bon. Where am I? I don't have anything right off the top. I'll have to maybe I can pop back in just a little bit and show you something, but any other je ne sais pas si j'ai encore le temps ou si c'est la fin de...
Vous avez encore 5 minutes à peu près.
5 minutes. Ben, je vais voir parce que, bon, je vais regarder dans mes archives parce que j'ai peut-être... Where do I have my Steam things? Je sais pas, est-ce que c'est là? Well, I can show just a few. These aren't all just me, but these are my students in a classroom preparing things. So they're making the Irma houses here. So they're folding papers. Usually they work side by side with their partner. They have a whole packet they have to go through to interview and then to make the proposition. And then they have to think of, they have the packet in front of them there. They have to draw before they create the 3D. So that I make them do a 2D and a 3D, and then they have to label things, and then eventually they come back and present it. So, voilà. I don't know if I have the actual houses. There's one of them. So one of the ideas was to have a house that was tall, so it wouldn't get washed away. And then they have to ask each other, well, would that really work or would that not work? What's good about this model? What's not good about it? Oh, there's some of them. That's kind of a, oh, those are the other kids. Okay, anyway. Those were the Irma houses. Ça, c'était la première année que j'ai intégré le STEAM. Ils ont fait aussi les centres pour les réfugiés aussi. Donc ça, c'était intéressant. Ils ont créé des centres avec des... non, ça, pour moi, c'était le lycée. Not middle school, high school. They look young. Donc voilà. Any other questions or?
At the time of those hurricanes in the Caribbean, there was a lot of news footage of the destruction and what was damaged in the houses. And maybe with more advanced students, there would have been opportunities for communication with kids in those places, or raising money to help people.
Yes.
We talked to a lot of people.
Part of the problem is that I have asked around, even within the AATF group of North Texas, and I haven't been able to find any information about who to write to, because I have tried to do, and in fact, I've even received a grant to do a project in our local community with the Francophone people, and there are people from Cameroon. I know there's a whole community of Cameroonais, but I can't find anybody to talk to about it. So I have been frustrated as a teacher of actually getting involved with people. And I know people in the North Texas group ought to be informed about that, but they don't seem to have any practical advice for me. So I would really appreciate having more contacts.
Mhm.
Maybe I need to ask you directly, but absolutely.
It is very
I am all
anecdotal.
for.
It is very anecdotal. There's no network.
Right. Yeah. It's just who you happen to find
Mhm.
someone in your community. Yeah, I know.
Yes.
Alors, très bien. Mais
Okay.
merci beaucoup à vous tous. Et oui, peut-être je mettrai quelques exemples dans mon PowerPoint et je pourrai envoyer après à Jane pour partager avec vous. Ça peut aller comme ça?
Oui. Oui, merci.
Okay, excellent. Merci à vous tous.
Merci beaucoup, Sandra.
Merci.
Et ça nous donne beaucoup d'idées à suivre, à incorporer, à adapter à nos besoins. Now we're going to move on to another level, but I think there are a lot of things that Michael's going to talk about that can be adapted to a lot of classes. Sandra, can you stop sharing your screen so Michael can put his up? Thank you. Michael, there you are.
Yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, let me get it.
Get to the beginning.
Wait. Okay. So, good evening, everybody. My name is Michael Foster, and for those of you that don't know me, I teach French at Eastern Michigan University, and my presentation is a slightly modified presentation from my summer AATF conference presentation, and I've added a few different things to it. So tonight I'll be talking to you guys about designing an interactive advanced French grammar and writing class. So this is a course that we offer every fall semester, and it incorporates different genres of reading that we introduce to the students and different writing tasks to the students. And we have a review of grammar, a review of the different genres for this class, fiction, essay dialectique, and then poetry or something creative like that. And so in this class, the main goals are the literacy, where they learn and practice different strategies for reading and writing, rhetorical awareness, where they write in different ways that achieve specific goals and ends, research and inquiry, looking up different sources that students will need to use for their essay dialectique, where they talk about being for a certain point of view, and then refuting that point of view and the antithèse that I'll talk about in a little bit. So we have them do that, being familiar with different kinds of genres that we read in the class and that they write about, and then different disciplinary conventions where they know how to write, present, and then talk about their things. And then the reflection mindset is something that's new that I'll talk about, that I've changed from the summer's version of this. So understanding how you write, why you write, and why we do these different editing things when we write. And so here, to give you a little introduction to the course, this is a textbook-based course. We use the textbook Réseau, and I've included a link for that from Cengage at the end of the presentation if you're interested in looking at that. And we read genre-based texts in this class based on composition topics. Like I said, the 4 topics are a narration personnelle, where they write about something that happened in their life. The second essay they write about is a essay that's supporting the point of view given. The third essay is a fiction, where they write a type of fiction that they can create with the grammatical and linguistic structures we review. And then the fourth essay is the essay dialectique, where they write an antithese that's against the given topic. And then the texts are mostly instructor selected. I did try asking students this semester to give input on the kind of text they wanted, and some of them said they would like to read short stories, so we did some short stories by Flaubert that they were interested in. And this class has a lot of interpersonal things where they speak with each other about the task, and then they present their stories to the class. And so we gave more opportunities for that this semester. And then also, when this class was taught before, it had it had older resources that needed to be updated. So these are things that I thought about over the summer as I was thinking about changing the class and things that I was going to be doing. And students had mentioned in the course evaluations that they enjoyed the overall class the way it had been taught in the past, but they wanted a wider variety of things to be incorporated and discussed in the class. And they also wanted more practice with spontaneous in-class writing, such as how to write lettre de motivation, CV, critiques, things like that. So those are some things that I've incorporated into the class, and they wanted a more in-depth explanation of grammatical structures and things of that nature in the class. And that's one of the reasons we use the Réseau textbook, because it has a lot of concise grammar explanations with activities that they can practice. And they also wanted more types of media to be used in the class. And I should also note that this was a very interesting semester, obviously because it was online, but also this class had 5 students in the class, 3 of whom were, let's say, intermediate, mid, intermediate, high on the ACTFL scale, and 2 were in the advanced low level of French. And so I ended up putting the 3 that were more intermediate in one group that did the breakout rooms together, and then the other group that was the more advanced, they did some other kinds of activities. And so this ended up being like a differentiated instruction where I would give one option of more higher end creative writing, like on Bloom's taxonomy, to these 2 students, and then the other ones would do the more traditional worksheet based activities for the class. So I can, if I have time, share a lesson plan like that with you guys at the end. And one of the big things about this writing intensive course that we offer to the students across the curriculum, regardless of major, the University Writing Center was updating these components, objectives, and all the writing intensive courses. And they really told the faculty to have students think more critically and, critically and more, I guess, like objectively, why are we having them doing all these writing tasks? What's the relevance of being reflective with your writing? And so the 2 things that I had students do this year and that will continue to do in the future is, the first thing I'll share with you after this slide is some reflection questions from the Réseau textbook, and I scanned the pages and included them here as a image on the slide, so you have access to that on the presentation. So students read through these reflection questions and thought about why they were doing certain things the way they did them in the essay components. And the second part of it was having students engage with their peers as a peer-to-peer review, to also engage with the interpersonal communication and the interpretive mode of communication, where they talk to each other and read each other's work. And a colleague of mine who teaches the similar writing course in German provided me with some self-reflection rubrics that she used in this fall 2020 semester that I'll adapt for French and use in the future. So here you have the scanned copy of the self-reflection questions. Comment évaluer une composition? So you have the plan, the outline, the organisation générale, the argument, and then the different types of things for these essays, the idée directrice or the thèse, and then the different kinds of questions that the students ask themselves for analyzing these different parts. the introduction, paragraph, the conclusion, different things that they would talk about in the parts of the essay. Then the ton of the essay, how is it written? And then le lecteur, who's the reader, le style, what is the style? And then for the types of essay, the titre, the different things that they put on there. So what kind of questions, I'm curious, do you guys ask your students, or if you have them engage in a kind of self reflection or self-assessment as they're planning a writing activity, what kinds of questions do you guys ask your students to look at? If anyone wants to share in the chat or the personne? Okay. Bon, je continue. We struggle with backing the arguments with facts. Okay. Oh, that's, yes. Yeah, it's, if you haven't taught it really to your students, these are questions that might be a little bit complex. These might even be similar to some of the questions that we as AP graders, AP readers consider on the AP rubric when we score the AP exam over the summer. So these are very, I don't want to say highfalutin questions, but these are very like theoretical questions about the different parts of the essay that students can ask. So. Oh, yes. Kristen, I really like that, writing in English, because when they use their L1, they can process it better. Yeah, and there's a whole thing about teaching language and using one's first language. And so I think that's important to think about that too, the words they use. Mm-hmm. Okay. Oui, quels sont les points positifs? Très bien. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we want questions to help our students feel like they're accomplishing work and not just what needs to be changed. And so what they feel good about it. And that's something I'll show in the next slide with this peer-to-peer evaluation rubric that my colleague in German uses. Okay. So all these different questions about the structure of each part of the essay, the tone, the style, who's the reader. Okay. And then that sometimes I'll have my students use that when they, there's a part in the Rizzo textbook called Collaborons, where they show each other these ideas that they're developing for their papers. And so sometimes I'll have the students like, look at those questions when they ask each other to look at their essays and say what needs to be changed or what looks good. But this here, I think, is a little more, these next couple slides that my colleague in German developed, I think these are maybe a little easier for the students to follow, because they're in English. And they show like, is the writing task complete? Does the text have a clear genre specific organization? So if the peer or the person that's writing it for self-reflection, if he or she says yes or no, then it gives some examples. Do I use paragraph length discourse using connectors and transitions? And they can answer and find examples. Is the vocabulary and language culturally appropriate for the task, for the audience? Does the language communicate effectively and reflect advanced, low, actful modalities? And then there's also a grammar self-check where they use different things. And obviously for this, I would delete all the German and add the appropriate French translations. And prior to teaching the different genres and the compositions they write, we review a lot of the grammar and go over a lot of the step-by-step process of how you formulate an essai pour le point de vue or an essai dialectique contre le point de vue donné. And so we go through a lot of like these grammatical scaffoldings that we present to the students. And that was kind of a breaking point for my class this semester, because I really like used you know, like supplemental grammatical resources. And some of the students said that they wanted worksheets, like lower level grammar worksheets to review the grammar. And then some of the upper level students said that they didn't want that. They wanted more higher level thinking and writing. And so that's kind of like where I started like making individualized instruction plans, where the two students that were more advanced students that were in the campus honors program, they were sort of in a breakout room by themselves and they did more complex free writing. And then the lower level students did the more grammatical worksheets, and they were happy to be like basically two separate, I don't want to say two separate classes, but they were like working in more accordance with their proficiency level. So for me, it made more work as the instructor, but I want the students to be happy and learning, especially in this COVID environment. So I didn't mind doing that. But yeah, so this is the slide that the self-editing students look at themselves. And some of those French questions could be incorporated here from English to French. And then the next slide. Oh yeah, this PowerPoint here that I'm sharing with you guys is, I emailed it to Jane this evening, so she should be able to share it the next day. Okay. My computer. Sorry, my computer is freezing. Okay, so the next slide is the peer editing rubric that my German colleague made. And this is where the students are engaging more in the interpersonal mode of communication, where they're speaking with each other. Well, they're doing first interpretive, where they're reading their peer's essay, answering the questions, and then they can speak with their peer with peer editing about what has the writer completed in the task. Is the writing within the confines of the genre? Is there evidence of paragraph length discourse? Does the writer make use of transitions, et cetera, et cetera? So these are things that the peers will look at once they've done their initial self-reflection on their own writing. And then, so besides those rubrics or those reflective tools, additionally, things that we'll continue to do teaching this class going forward, our students will complete a survey on the kinds of texts that they would like to read or be exposed to, or other types of media they would like to be exposed to at the beginning of the semester. And then students can, pick and present relevant grammatical structures from these sources that they want to read or watch. So ideally, if there's a student that really likes a particular song by a particular French or Francophone artist, and they know that song has the passé composé, the imparfait, the subjunctive, or whatever is in it, they could ideally, even with my help, say, I want to present this song or present this text to my classmates. And I know that in the lyrics, there's these words that relate to the passé composé, the imparfait, and they could even be like a budding teaching assistant doing something like that. And then ideally, there when we're back in the regular classroom, there would be like a student conference where they present their final draft of their paper to their classmates. And I was actually speaking with my students like 2 or 3 weeks ago about this student conference where they would present their final drafts of their papers to their classmates, and they were really reluctant to do it because some of the students are very shy and very hesitant about speaking. So with everything with COVID, we decided we would scrap the student conference this semester, but if we're back in the classroom next fall, this is something I'm going to try to insist on so that they have the presentational mode of communication as well. And then additionally, some technology in the classroom. There's audio books that students can listen to where if there's a certain book that they want to read or a text they want to read, and they want to get practice listening to it, they can go to the audiobooks literatureaudio.com and like find some of the texts in French so that they can listen to it and understand it. And then also one thing I'm starting to do is I save all the different copies of the genres that they write, and I save them so that I can make like a little digital library and then provide examples of these genres as templates to my future students so that they can kind of like see what work has been done before them so they can kind of modify or adapt that to themselves. And then also this year with digital storytelling, for those of you that are not familiar with that, that's where like students make a movie with Windows Movie Maker, for example, and they can post it to YouTube and have pictures or animations where they describe a story that they've done, or they can like, if they've had an experience in a French-speaking country, they can like do a digital storytelling about their experience. And one of my students who's in the honors program, she wrote a story based on Frozen, and she also drew pictures for the story. And so she made like a digital storybook with animations on it where she drew the pictures with her iPad and put those into the story. But she didn't have time to use Windows Movie Maker and make an actual video where she narrates it. But last year when she was in my writing class, she did she wrote a song and made a video of her singing the song based on one of the stories that we read. And then also the Kahoot and Quizlet, a lot of, even though this is like a 400 level writing class, the students still like playing Kahoot to review grammar, and they also liked it to like review different characters in the story or different themes in the story. So even students that are college seniors enjoy playing Kahoot to get you know, a break from the normal like discussion and stuff. So, and there's a whole bunch of Kahoots if you've never used it. If you go to the Kahoot website, it's free, and there's all kinds of French Kahoots that other French instructors at all levels have made that you can like find by subject, and you can kind of preview the questions before you use it with your own students. And then something else that I'm going to start doing more of in the future is use rubrics to evaluate the writing itself. So it's clear for students how they're progressing on their writing. I believe the audio is free, and the link for that is in the resources slide at the end of my presentation. So yeah, one of my colleagues here in Spanish education does a really good job with rubrics. So I'm collaborating with her on using rubrics more in my courses so students see a clearer alignment between learning outcomes and assessment that I'll start doing. So I found a sample analytic rubric that I'll share with you next from the New York State Department of Education for writing to show how students are progressing on different components in the writing assignments. So it's my computer froze. It's an analytic rubric. Okay, here it is. It's an analytic rubric where if you can adapt the points. So this is a general writing rubric for its 4 different categories. So content, coherency, fluency, syntax or grammar, and then the overall like use of the vocabulary. So here you can see it's broken down 0 to 5, where everything is correct, almost error-free for a 5, all the way down to no response, does not fit the topic. Coherency, the same type of Likert scale, 0 to 5. And for those of you that are familiar with the AP exam, either teaching AP or like myself grading the AP exam every June, you see that this is a very similar kind of analytic rubric versus a holistic rubric that we use to grade those. So these are in English and they're free to find. And I gave the website for this as well at the end. So you could like ideally, you know, turn this into a Word document from a PDF and then modify it yourself to make it into a French rubric for writing. Oh, good, it is free, yes, okay. Très bien, c'est gratuit. Okay. So next, I think it was just some other things that I was going to continue doing, but my computer is, I think, frozen. Oh, okay. Yeah. So for the conclusion, continuing to align the activities I do with my students so that they meet all these new learning outcomes, especially with the reflection, ensuring that it's a student-centered class. So having the students be more proactive in what they want to read or what they want to listen to, and then just making it more active for them, and then creating and appropriate resources that I use in the class to make it more innovative and always keeping up with different things so that they have a good experience. And like I said, this was a very difficult semester because it was the second time that I taught this class, but this was a very difficult group of students, like I said, that were at different levels of proficiency, and they also had different learning disabilities that made it extra challenging, but they were very hardworking nonetheless. And this class really took a lot of energy, but it was a good experience. And they emailed me and said, thank you for a good class, because this is our last week of courses. So it kind of made me smile that I was able to try these things with them. And so that's everything. And I'll be happy to answer any questions. And the resources here are at the end that I used.
Merci beaucoup, Michael. Thank you so much to all of our speakers and to all of you who spent a little time with us this evening. Does anyone have any questions for Michael before we?
Yes.
I will post the PowerPoints and the chat tomorrow, and we will also have the video up within a few days. Depends on how quickly my editor can get to it. I want to thank you all so much for coming. If you want a participation certificate, don't forget to send your screenshot to staff@frenchteachers.org. The link to all the documents can be found at the bottom of the invitation to this meeting. That will take you to the Google Doc where everything is linked. And that's updated as we have new documents to add. I'd like to invite you all to come back next week when we're going to be doing our last webinar of the semester on Martinique and the French Caribbean. So, bonne soirée tout le monde.